Hi, everybody. I'm Dennis Daly. I spent 20 years with United Press International, most of it with the old UPI Radio Network. And my favorite assignment was going on the road producing and hosting American Montage. It was an hour-long weekly program. Now here's an edited version of one of those shows. Hi again, everybody, and welcome to this week's American Montage. We come to you from the UPI studios in Los Angeles, and sitting across the desk from me is a man who, well, is among those people who needs no introduction, particularly if this were television. Ed McMahon has been one of the most visible people in TV for decades. Before that, he was a major star in Philadelphia television. Ed, let's talk about that and a lot more, but before going on the air here, you were beginning to tell me your feelings on the power of the human voice. We were talking about the impact of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, that kind of thing, and that sometimes you can tell really what's going on without hearing the words by simply hearing the inflection.
I remember the day that Pearl Harbor was bombed. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I had gone to the movies, and this was in Lowell, Massachusetts, with a couple of my buddies. And we were walking home. I tell you, we walked. We walked back from, downtown. We didn't go anywhere else, but we just walked back from downtown. And we were walking home, and we were like, kibitzing. You know how you kibitz on the street, somebody picked up a can, and they threw it like a football, and we were just, and as we were walking home, as we were going by the houses, going home, and there was no television in those days, of course, but radio, all of a sudden, there was like an ominous feeling about whatever little radio we could hear from the houses, passing by the houses.
Just the
through the windows,
of it?
It was December, but you could hear people in Lowell didn't close their windows in wintertime. I remember I used to wake up in my grandmother's home, there'd be snow on the floor. She said you had to have fresh air during the night. You couldn't sleep without fresh air. So people had their windows, you could hear. And as we kept going, and finally I said to like three of my buddies, I said, something's happened. And they said, what? I said, listen. And we walked some more, and I said, don't you hear that? There's something going on. Something's not right. And so somebody said, well, what do you? I said, well, wait a minute, So we were bold enough. We went up to a door, and it's a town where can you be friendly and knock on a door. So I went up, and we all went up, and it was a porch, and we went in the porch. They used to have what they called verandas in those days. So we went in, and we knocked on the door, and we said, did something happen? And they said, did something happen? We're at war, and then they went, holy Lord. But talking about the voice, that voice of whoever was on the air. Now, I don't know whether it was Edward R. Murrow or H.B. Kaltenborn or what was the other guy?
John Daly was John Daly. You hear a lot, yeah.
Well, I don't know who it was, but boy, you could hear in that voice the seriousness of that. And it happened again to me, and talking about voices. I was, my daughter and I had flown down to Washington. I had gone to Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and they had a great speech and drama department, great school. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, when she came time to go to school, she wanted to go there. So she and I had flown. I was doing the Tonight Show that night, but we worked it out so I could fly down in the morning with her.
This is when the Tonight Show was still in New York.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I could fly down with her, and we could have the meeting, and then we could fly back. We were held on the runway at National Airport, because Kennedy had been shot that day, and we were due off, and I was worried about getting back in time. I said, I got to get back, Claudia. And nobody said anything on the airplane. We didn't know anything. Everything was frozen, like we didn't taxi, nothing was moving. Then finally we took off. We landed in New York, and I forgot about it till I got into the cab. And in those days, this is now, back some years, every cab didn't have a radio like they do now. And there was a few that had. So I get in the cab, and there again, Claudia and I are talking, gee, I hope I get in. And I'm saying, oh, you'll get in, and this and that. And I said, everything will be fine. And we're talking, chatting, and I'm on my way to 30 Rock to do the Tonight Show. And again, I interrupt myself, and I said to the cab driver, I said, did something bad happen? He said, bad? He said, the president's been killed. Well, holy. So there's funny. I get a chill now when I think about it. You always remember where you were when that happened, when John Kennedy was shot and killed. But you're right. There is a thing about a voice, that reassuring voice. My father used to, we talked earlier about my father telling stories, about the thing. My father had a voice. Now, I never thought about it when I was starting out, but he could tell a story, and he did get your attention. And you're right. We don't have, since Cronkite left, we don't seem to have that.
Well, you take a storyteller, and many people will be too young to remember, like Sam Levinson. God bless him. Would take 8 minutes to get to the punchline sometimes. But we were slower back then, but he had that beautiful edge on his voice that just kept holding on to you.
That's right.
And Garrison Keillor is like that.
In rapt attention, you listened. Sure.
You then ended up in Philadelphia,
Yes.
and people who are old enough remember you as a person who, every time they turned on the television, you said you were on 13
shows
at one time. Yeah, Mr. Television.
There's a cute line in the book. I wrote this book with David Fisher, who wrote a great book, many books, but this was a big bestseller. It was by George Burns, called Gracie. It was a salute to his wife. It was like a love letter to his wife, filled with warmth and humor. And he wrote me, in this proposal, he sent me this, and this is what made me sold on him. A lot of people had approached me about doing this book, and I'll do it next year. You're always putting it off. I'll do it next year. He wrote this proposal. He said, and he found this in a story in Time magazine. He said, me speaking, there I was in Philadelphia's Mr. Television. I had 13 television shows, my own shows, 13 of them, and I was called off for the Korean War. I left Philadelphia with 13 shows to go fight in Korea. People were shooting at me, and they'd never seen any of my shows.
The last time we talked years ago, I brought up the fact that there's a temptation on the part of some to think of you as having been in an ancillary position on The Tonight Show, the second banana.
Sure.
But you tell it so well in the book, without being huffy about it, of the importance of what you did. Can we get into that?
Sure.
Because I really feel, obviously the show wouldn't have worked without you, and obviously Johnny was the star, but you point out that there were a couple of times where you had to save him.
Oh, sure.
And maybe more than you bring out in the book.
More than a couple of
Yes.
times. But, there's a lot of things I bring up in the book. I talk in the book about. But there was a time when he was doing the monologue. Now, oftentimes a monologue would be going along swimmingly, and then there'd be a bad joke. Well, his savor, or his recovery from the bad joke, oftentimes was funnier than the original joke. And he is great at that, picking up, making that work, being very self-deprecating at times. He just knew how to do that so well. Anyway, this particular night, it was not going well. About 3 or 4 jokes in a row, and the savers weren't working. It was just really kind of dismal. So I did something very brave. I walked out to his special place in the middle of the monologue. I just walked out there, and that was very precious. Nobody went out there. There was a star cut into the floor, the gold star, and even the guys who comics had come out and did their turn. They never stood there. They stood in another mark, just a T mark, but that was like Carson's place. You didn't go there. So anyway, I walked out. I grabbed him by the shoulders. I turned him toward me like I was a coach talking to one of my players. And I said, don't let this audience intimidate you. You're better than this. You know funny things. You say things funny. You can do this. I want you to get in there, and I want you to do it. Now, don't let me down. You got it? And I hit him on the shoulder, and he picks right exactly what I'm doing. He looks at me and says, thanks. I needed that. Well, it's like an old movie, Here's what I've found that I'm very pleased about. The people that have to really read the book. Now, you were nice enough to read the book, but like Rosie O'Donnell, she has a woman. That's her job. She has to read the book and then give Rosie a précis, some kind of an outline. This would be good. So ask him about this and give her a layout. Rosie doesn't have to read the book. She just gets to these, little islands of conversation, and she has a great interview. What has happened is when I talk to the reader, the interviewer, the person, who sets up the thing, who has really read the book, they are raving about it. They're calling it a page turner. They're calling it a good read. I've heard that phrase used many times, good read. I'm interviewed by this guy from PBS. It's a very austere professorial type who's approaching me, not like you're interviewing me, where I'm very comfortable with you. This is what I do, this is what you do, this is easy. He says something nice. He said, I like this book. This book is a good read.
Ed McMahon, thank you again for joining us. It's good to see you again. You look great, and I think there's a lesson in what you say for all of us.
Don't stop doing it. Keep doing it because it'll keep you young.
Boy, I thought I loved to talk. The fun thing about interviewing Ed McMahon is you just ask him a question and sit back and listen. Ed McMahon on this week's American Montage. And there you have it, another edited episode of one of the American Montage programs prepared for the UPI Radio Network back in the 1980s and 90s. I'm Dennis Daly. Thanks for listening. Thanks for going with me this week. And check YouTube for more American Montage programs.